right, so here we are at chapter 10 of Genesis. So this is where we start getting into the descendants of basically Noah's children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Remember, just as a precursor, what came in Genesis 9, where you had this thing after the flood, and an undiscerned amount of time, it's not specified, after the flood. Noah becomes drunk, because he becomes a farmer and plants a vineyard. He becomes drunk and he falls asleep basically naked in his tent. Ham sees him, and instead of covering him or looking away and trying to not see that, he goes out and he tells his brothers. And then the two brothers, Shem and Japheth, they go in and they make sure to not look. And they cover his nakedness, and they honor their father in that way. And then Noah speaks this, basically. When Noah woke from his drunken stupor, he learned what Ham, his youngest son, had done. He cursed the descendants of Canaan, the son of Ham. So basically, that's interchangeable. This Ham was the father of Canaan, is what we're seeing in that chapter. But basically, he says a curse on the Canaanites, your descendants, Ham. May they be the lowest servants to the descendants of Shem and Japheth. And then Noah said, may Shem be blessed by the Lord my God, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge the territory of Japheth. May he share the prosperity of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. So there you go. Noah lives another 350 years after the flood. He was 950 years old when he died, just letting you know. Cool. So Noah has passed away. He lived a grand old life, 950 years. So here's where we see it playing out. Because the question to me was, all right, God has said and spoken these blessings and curses. And you saw a descendant of Cain, Lamech, I don't remember who that was. Basically saying, anybody who I've murdered these boys that attack me, and if anyone murders me for vengeance, may they be cursed. Like, he speaks a curse on these things. So the idea of curses and blessings is something that people do, but the question here is Noah, being a righteous man who was delivered, even though he had this little drunken stupor moment and is lying there naked, is this something that is going to play out? Is the Lord going to honor his blessings and his curses is the question that I have. So that leads us kind of into 10. This is the history of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Many children were born to them after the flood, the descendants of Japheth. 2. The descendants of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer, so it's going through, and it says here's the first generation. Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. I don't know how to pronounce any of these things, and I'm sorry. The descendants of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanium. The descendants became the seafaring peoples in various lands, each tribe with its own language. So you see this idea of tribes, and you see them kind of falling into patterns as a people, which is really interesting to notice. So these descendants of Japheth, these multiple generations down, like you see them becoming seafaring peoples in various lands. So they're going to get scattered, they're going to be in various lands, and these are seafaring people. These tribes have different languages. Okay, descendants of Ham, at verse 6. The descendants of Ham, who are going to be servants to Japheth and Shem's descendants here, but we'll see what happens. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, Sebteka, and the descendants of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. Verse 8, one of Cush's descendants was Nimrod, who became a heroic warrior. See, this is really interesting. There were times when we've seen a little bit of lineage pop up previously in Genesis, and then there's like this pause where someone or some tribe is noteworthy. Last time it was Enoch. It's like, hey, he enjoyed a close fellowship with the Lord, and he lived like 365 years, where all these people were living 900 years average, and then one day he just disappeared because the Lord took him. Like here you see another like these people came from these people, these were the descendants, and then suddenly there's at verse 8, one of Cush's descendants was Nimrod, who became a heroic warrior. He was a mighty hunter in the Lord's sight. So he's not only impressive, like he's a mighty hunter in the Lord's sight. The Lord is like, wow, you're a really good hunter. For the Lord to think any of us are good at anything, like impressively, like that's worth noting, I would say. So that's how good and heroic of a warrior and how good and mighty of a hunter that Nimrod was. His name became proverbial, and people would speak of someone as being like Nimrod, a mighty hunter in the Lord's sight. So this might have been a colloquialism in that day, and you might have heard people going, oh, wow, yeah, it's like a Nimrod, you know. But Nimrod is, we've maybe heard it. I remember people getting called Nimrod in cartoons. Oh, don't be such a Nimrod, and it would mean like dimwit, not mighty hunter. So that's interesting, but that's a weird personal aside. He built the foundation for his empire in the land of Babylonia, with the cities of Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From there he extended his reign to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Rezin, the main city of the empire located between Nineveh and Calah. This is hard to read and ignore if you know anything about any of these cities. So I would just say let's take note. Let's take note of these things. That Nimrod is this heroic warrior. He's a mighty hunter in the Lord's sight. He's definitely set apart. His name becomes proverbial, and he's like a measurement of excellence in hunting and in leadership. Clearly, he built the foundation for his empire in the land of Babylonia. So he's so mighty and powerful as a hunter and skilled that he's actually like just basically building this empire in the land of Babylonia, where the cities of Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh. He extends his reign to Assyria. So I think it's important for us to note some of these locations, even in Assyria where you get Nineveh. The main city of the empire located between Nineveh and Calah. At verse 13, Mizraim was the ancestor of the Ludites, Anamites, Leabites, Naphtuhites, the Perushites, Pathrusites, I'm so sorry, Casluhites, and the Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. The Philistines. Okay, so the Philistines, let's take note of that too. Because again, we're trying to take it at face value. But it is establishing something here. It is establishing locations, the thoughts of many tribes and descendants, that there are multiple languages for the different tribes, at least with the descendants of Japheth, and that they're getting scattered, but you see this empire being built. And notice that this is the descendant of Ham, who was cursed by Noah. So those are the things that I think are at least important on a face value noting. Canaan's oldest son was Sidon, the ancestor of the Sidonians. Canaan was also the ancestor of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Avradites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. Which makes sense that instead of being Canaanites, they could have been Hamathites. That would have been way less confusing probably to talk about Ham's descendants, but whatever. 19. Eventually the territory of Canaan spread from Sidon to Gerar near Gaza, and to Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim near Lasha. These were the descendants of Ham, identified according to their tribes, languages, territories, and nations. So Ham, whose descendants were cursed by Noah, all of these descendants that we're hearing of, to be the servants of the descendants of his brothers. What we see right now is them actually being very skilled, at least in Nimrod's sight, enough to build empire, and one that is really clearly growing, and that they're establishing territories and nations and languages as well, and they've got a bunch of tribes. So things to point out there. because face value and looking at what's come before and thinking about kind of where we're probably going to be headed, because everything has been foundation building on top of these things. Now we see the descendants of Shem. 21. Sons were also born to Shem, the older brother of Japheth. Shem was the ancestor of all the descendants of Eber. The descendants of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The descendants of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah. The Shelah was the father of Eber. Eber had two sons. The first was named Peleg, division, for during his lifetime the people of the world were divided into different language groups and dispersed. His brother's name was Joktan. So again, you have this one specific standout, and this is significant because Nimrod is like, this is a term that we use and something that people are measured against. He was a mighty hunter in the sight of the Lord. Here's why he stood out. Here it's just interesting that you have Peleg, which is division. This name had a meaning here. Okay, again, you've seen that before. So names having a meaning and kind of foretelling some things. For during Peleg's lifetime, okay, the people of the world were divided into different language groups, and they were dispersed. They're scattered. So notice there that this happens during Peleg's lifetime. So this basically, this is Arphaxad. This is the second generation under them. Yep. So the second generation coming up under the descendants of these three brothers. So these three brothers, all of their descendants are starting to, by the second generation, break up into language groups, and they're getting dispersed. Brother's name was Joktan. Joktan was the ancestor of Almodad, Sheleth, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. Jobab? I feel like the Key and Peele sketch. I'm just like, you done messed up, A.A. Ron. D nice. Sorry, I'm pronouncing these this way. 30. The descendants of Joktan lived in the area extending from Misha toward the eastern hills of Sephar. These were the descendants of Shem, identified according to their tribes, languages, territories, and nations. So again, it's saying, hey, all of these split into this. This is how you can recognize these people. They come from this lineage. They come from this brother. And then at 32 it says, these are the families that came from Noah's sons, listed nation by nation according to their lines of descent. The earth was populated with the people of these nations after the flood. So it's saying all people are coming from these three brothers. Okay? And that's where we're at right now. So you see this division happening. You don't necessarily see any blessing or curse. They're all blessed with multiplying and actually following the Lord's command at this point of multiplying and filling the earth. You don't hear of anything murder-wise. You hear that obviously Nimrod is this great hunter, and that he's establishing a nation, and there are very specific nations that will become very essential for us to kind of look back at. So I'm going to make some notes here about what specific nations and descendants and tribes came from what, so that we can see how this blessing and cursing from Noah, how that plays out, if the Lord God actually blesses these two brothers and their descendants, or if this curse actually happens with Ham, the Canaanites. So we will see, but I'll put a pin in that, and that pretty much gets us through Genesis chapter 10. If you've ever read through Genesis before, then that's one of those things where we're getting into a thing where you're going to catch a lot of lineage, and it's passing a lot of time through generations, and it's real easy to kind of skip over some of those things because the names are like just ridiculous to try to pronounce, and so it's really easy to kind of breeze by. But I'm trying to milk this for all it's worth, and I'm encouraging you to do the same thing. So make some notes here and see who came from that. I'm going to make a little cheat sheet and start documenting this, so I don't have to keep going, hey, remember, and this was the pattern here at Genesis 2, and here's the one from Genesis 3, and this points back to this. I'm going to kind of make a cheat sheet so it's easier for all of us to follow along, because now we're catching a lot of foundational things that we're going to probably build off of, I would imagine. But I'm pretending I haven't read the rest of the Bible. And I hope you're enjoying this, and I will see you next time for Chapter 11.